Welcome to Creepy Whispers. I'm Jack Thompson, and here we'll explore stories that will send chills down your spine. Get ready to dive into the unknown, where each whisper hides a secret. First story. Hey everyone. I never thought I'd be sharing something like this, but I need to tell you what happened to me. I'm still trying to understand it all. A few months ago, I returned from a Caribbean cruise, a trip that was supposed to fulfill my late husband John's dream. We always planned to take this trip together, you know. But he passed away suddenly 2 years ago, and I felt lost. I decided to take this trip alone as a way to honor him. Little did I know that this decision would lead me to an experience that shook me in a way I still can't explain. I boarded the ship in Miami with a heavy heart and a suitcase full of expectations. On the very first day, while I was on the deck watching the sea, I noticed a man standing near the railing. He wore a straw hat and a very eye-catching floral shirt. What caught my attention was the way he looked at the horizon. He seemed so serene. For a moment, I thought about going to talk to him, but I ended up not doing it. After all, I was there to be alone, right? But that figure stayed in my mind. There was something about him that intrigued me. I can't explain it exactly. It was just the beginning of a series of strange encounters that made this trip very different from what I expected. The next day, we arrived at the first island on the itinerary, St. Thomas. I decided to take a tour of the city, trying to distract myself and enjoy a bit. As I walked down a street full of colorful shops, I had that strange feeling of being watched. You know when you feel like someone's looking at you? Well, when I turned around, there he was again, the man with the straw hat. He was standing in front of a souvenir shop, staring at me with a kind of mysterious smile. I was speechless for a moment, but when I blinked, he simply vanished. I looked around, confused. How could someone disappear so quickly? I was left with that nagging feeling, you know, but I tried not to think too much about it and continued my tour. I returned to the ship that night, feeling strange. I couldn't stop thinking about that mysterious man. I decided to go to the ship's bar to have a drink and try to relax a bit. I sat at the counter and ordered a drink. While I was waiting, I started chatting with the bartender, a very friendly guy named Miguel. I don't know why, but I ended up telling him about the man I had seen. Miguel looked at me with a kind of weird face and asked for more details about the guy's appearance. When I finished describing him, he went pale. He said that this description matched exactly that of a passenger who had died on a previous cruise a few years ago. I felt a chill down my spine. Was I seeing things? Or worse, had I seen a ghost? I couldn't sleep well that night. I kept going over in my head what Miguel had told me, trying to find some logical explanation. Maybe it was just a coincidence, right? Or maybe the bartender was joking with me. But something inside me said it wasn't that simple. The next morning, we arrived in St. Martin. I decided I was going to enjoy the day at the beach, try to forget this whole story. I grabbed my bag, put on a bikini, and went to the sand. The day was beautiful, blue sky, calm sea. I was starting to relax when I felt that same sensation of being watched. I looked around and, believe it or not, there he was again. The man with the straw hat was sitting in a beach chair about 20 meters from me, staring at me. My heart raced. It couldn't be a coincidence. It's not possible. I gathered my courage and decided to go talk to him. I got up, took a deep breath, and started walking towards him. As I approached, he kept staring at me with that enigmatic smile. I was almost there when a group of children ran between us. It was a matter of seconds, but when I looked back at the chair, he had disappeared. Again. I looked everywhere, searched the entire beach. asked people around if they had seen a man with a straw hat. Nothing. It was as if he had evaporated into thin air. I returned to my spot on the beach feeling completely lost. What was happening to me? Was I going crazy? I returned to the ship that day totally shaken. I couldn't enjoy the trip properly anymore, you know? I was always looking over my shoulder, expecting to see that mysterious man again. I decided I needed to find out more about this story. I went to look for Miguel at the bar, but he wasn't on duty that day. I ended up talking to another bartender and asked about the passenger who had died. He seemed a bit uncomfortable, but ended up telling me that there really had been an accident a few years ago. A man had fallen from the ship during the night and was never found. The strangest thing? The accident had happened on exactly the same date my husband passed away. I felt my blood run cold. How was this possible? The next day, we arrived in Barbados. I was determined not to leave the ship, but something told me I needed to go. It was as if a force was pulling me out. I reluctantly got off and started walking through the city. That's when I saw a small church at the end of a street. I can't explain it, but I felt I needed to go in there. When I opened the door, my heart nearly stopped. There he was, the man with the straw hat, sitting on a bench at the back of the church. This time, he didn't disappear. He turned, looked at me, and smiled. A smile so familiar that it reminded me of John. My legs were shaking as I walked towards him. When I got close, he stood up and said, "I've been waiting for you, Mary." John sent a message. I was paralyzed. How did he know my name? And what did he mean by a message from John? My head was spinning, but I managed to find the strength to ask who he was. He smiled again, in that way that reminded me so much of John, and said, "I'm just a messenger, Mary. I'm here to tell you that John is fine, and he wants you to move on." Tears started rolling down my face. I wanted to say something, ask more questions, but the words simply wouldn't come out. The man continued, "He knows you made this trip for him, and he's happy you came. But now it's time to live your own life." He then took off the straw hat and placed it in my hands. "This is for you to remember that life goes on, even after we're gone." I stood there, holding the hat, not knowing what to say or do. When I finally managed to look up, the man had disappeared. But this time, I didn't feel scared or confused. I felt a peace I hadn't felt in a long time. I left the church still a bit dazed, with the hat in my hands, trying to process everything that had happened. The rest of the day passed like a blur. I returned to the ship and stayed in my cabin, going over every detail of that encounter in my head. Part of me wanted to believe it was just my imagination, that grief was making me see things. But the straw hat there, real and tangible in my hands, was proof that something had really happened. In the days that followed, I didn't see the mysterious man again. It was as if he had fulfilled his mission and disappeared. But the feeling he left stayed with me. I started to enjoy the trip more, to open myself up to experiences. I made friends with a group of people on the ship and even participated in some activities that I wouldn't have considered before. The straw hat became my constant companion. I took it everywhere, as a reminder of the surreal encounter I had and the message I received. People sometimes asked about the hat, and I just smiled, keeping that secret to myself. On the last night of the cruise, I decided to go to the upper deck to see the stars. While I was there, leaning on the railing, looking at the sky and the infinite sea, I felt a gentle breeze. For a moment, I had the impression of hearing John's voice whispering in the wind, "Live, my love." I closed my eyes, letting the tears flow freely. But this time, they were tears of gratitude, not sadness. I realized that this trip had been much more than a tribute to John. It had been a new beginning for me. Something had changed inside me, and I knew I would return home different from how I had left. I returned home after that trip with a strange feeling of peace and restlessness at the same time. Peace because I felt I had received a kind of okay from John to move on. Restlessness because, well, how to explain to people what had happened? I tried to tell my sister, but she thought it was all a product of my imagination, stress, and longing. Maybe she's right, you know? Sometimes I doubt myself if all that really happened. But then I look at the straw hat, which now hangs in my room, and I know I didn't make anything up. That man, whoever he was real. The message he brought was real. It's been a few months since the cruise, and I confess I still think a lot about all this. I haven't seen the mysterious man again, of course, but sometimes I feel like he's around, you know? It's a strange feeling, but comforting. I decided to share this story here because, well, I needed to get it out. I don't expect everyone to believe it, but who knows, maybe someone has gone through something similar. I know it sounds crazy, but I swear every word I wrote here is true. This experience changed my life in a way that I can't quite explain. All I know is that now, when I look to the future, I no longer feel that crushing weight of loss. I feel hope, and who knows, maybe even a little bit of magic. Second story, guys, I need to share something bizarre that happened to me a few weeks ago. I haven't been able to sleep since then and can't stop thinking about it. It was during a cruise in the Mexican Riviera that I took with my friends to celebrate the end of the semester. We were super excited, you know. That vacation vibe, sun, beach. Little did I know it would turn into a nightmare. On the first day, we decided to go to a pool party on the ship. Everyone was dancing, drinking, having fun. I was feeling amazing, taking lots of photos with my friends. At one point, I went to the bar to get another drink and left my phone on the table with my girlfriends. When I came back, where was the phone? Gone. I freaked out. We searched everywhere, asked everyone around, but nothing. The party ended, and I went back to my room feeling awful. I kept thinking about all the photos, contacts, and messages I had lost. But that wasn't even the worst part. The next day, I started noticing strange things. Like, I was having breakfast in the ship's restaurant and saw a guy staring at me. When I looked back, he quickly looked away. I thought it was weird, but didn't think much of it. Later, I was at the gym, and I swear I saw the same guy passing by the glass door several times, always looking inside. I started to get paranoid. Was it just in my head? I was alone in there and started feeling a chill down my spine. I decided to leave early and go back to my room. On the way, I passed by the deck and saw the guy again. He was using a phone just like mine. I was scared to confront the guy alone, so I ran to my friend's room to tell them what was happening. They thought I was overreacting, said it was impossible to be sure it was the same guy, that I was probably seeing things because of the stress of losing my phone. But I knew it wasn't paranoia. Something wrong was going on. I decided to be more alert. I spent the rest of the day observing everything around me. And that's when things got even creepier. Every time I posted something on social media using a friend's phone, minutes later, I'd see the guy nearby. It was like he knew exactly where I was all the time. At one point, he passed by me and smiled in a way that gave me chills. At night, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to do something. I convinced my friends to go with me to talk to the ship's security. I explained everything, showed them photos we had taken of the guy from afar. The security guards promised to investigate, but I could tell they weren't taking it very seriously. They said without concrete evidence, they couldn't do much. I went back to the room shaking, could barely breathe. I locked the door and kept looking through the peephole, paranoid. That's when I saw a notification on my friend's tablet. It was from my Instagram. Someone had posted a photo of me, taken that same day, with the caption, "So beautiful and doesn't even know she's being watched." I froze. It was him. He was using my own account to terrorize me. I didn't sleep at all that night. I stayed awake, staring at the door, afraid that someone might come in at any moment. My friends took turns staying with me, but even that didn't calm me down. In the morning, I decided I wouldn't leave the room anymore. I didn't want to give the guy a chance to see me or take more photos. My friends tried to convince me to enjoy the last day of the cruise, but I was too terrified. I stayed locked up all day, jumping at every little noise. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps in the hallway and hold my breath, thinking it was him. My friends brought food to the room and tried to distract me, but I couldn't think of anything else. I kept imagining what this guy wanted, why he was doing this. Was it just for the phone? Or was there something more? Finally, it was time to disembark. I was relieved to leave the ship, but at the same time terrified that the guy might follow me. My friends made a barrier around me as we left. I looked everywhere, paranoid, thinking I'd see him at any moment. We managed to get to the airport without any incident, and I started to calm down a little. I thought that maybe, just maybe, all of that had been left behind. But man, I was so wrong. When I got home, I noticed there was a strange message on the answering machine. It was a distorted voice saying, "Hi, Camila. Did you enjoy the cruise? I loved meeting you. I was paralyzed. How did he get my home number? How did he know where I lived?" I ran to lock all the doors and windows, my heart beating so hard it felt like it was going to come out of my mouth. The police came, asked a bunch of questions, took notes. But in the end, they said they couldn't do much without concrete evidence. They told me to change the locks, install security cameras, that kind of thing. But none of that made me feel safe. I couldn't sleep, barely ate. I kept looking out the window all the time, thinking I'd see someone watching me. My parents wanted me to go live with them for a while, but I refused to leave the house. A week after the cruise, the scariest thing of all happened. It was about 3 in the morning, and I was lying in bed, unable to sleep as usual. Suddenly, I heard a noise at the living room window. My blood ran cold. I was completely still, barely breathing. The noise continued, as if someone was trying to open the window. I grabbed my new phone with trembling hands and called the police. They arrived in minutes, but when they entered, there was no one. The only thing they found was a piece of paper under the door with a message. "Until next time, Camila." Since then, nothing else has happened. But I still can't sleep properly. I still jump at any noise. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again. Will this ever end? Or is he still out there, watching me, waiting for the right moment to appear again? Third story, my dream turned into a nightmare in a matter of days. I had just landed a job as a bartender on a cruise ship and was over the moon. I'd always been crazy about traveling, and the idea of exploring new places while working seemed perfect. The first 2 trips were exactly as I imagined. I met people from all over, learned to make drinks I didn't even know existed, and felt more fulfilled than ever. I was super excited for my 3rd trip, a transatlantic cruise from Lisbon to New York. It felt like something out of a movie, you know. Me, a small town girl, crossing the ocean on a fancy ship. It never crossed my mind that this trip would change my life forever, and not in the way I wanted. The start of the cruise was normal. I was excited, full of energy, ready for another adventure. On the 2nd day, I bumped into Ralph. He was one of those guys who looked like he stepped out of a magazine. Handsome, charming, always with a cool story to tell. Ralph was a passenger and started showing up regularly at the bar where I worked. We chatted a lot during my breaks, and I kept falling more for him. He said he was a businessman, traveled a lot for work, and loved meeting new people on his trips. Everything seemed perfect, you know. A nice guy hitting on me, fun conversations after work, that butterflies in the stomach feeling. I was completely blinded by his charm, with no idea what was coming. It was on the fourth day of the trip that things started getting weird. I had just finished my shift, and Ralph invited me for a drink on the deck. I thought it was super romantic, you know. Us there under the stars, with the sound of the sea. He ordered 2 martinis and we chatted. I remember taking a few sips and starting to feel dizzy. At first, I thought it was the ship's movement, but I soon realized something was wrong. My vision blurred, my legs felt weak. Ralph asked if I was okay and offered to take me to my room. From there on, things get fuzzy in my head. I remember bits like flashes. Ralph guiding me through the corridors, trying to keep me on my feet. Us entering my cabin. Me falling on the bed, too dizzy to do anything. The sound of drawers opening, things being moved. I tried to speak, to ask what was happening, but my tongue felt like lead. The last thing I remember before completely blacking out was Ralph whispering a "sorry, darling" in my ear. When I woke up hours later, my head was pounding, and I felt like I'd been hit by a train. As soon as I opened my eyes, I realized something was very wrong. My cabin looked like it had been hit by a hurricane. Drawers open, clothes scattered on the floor, my suitcase ransacked. I jumped up, ignoring the dizziness, and went straight to my secret hiding place, where I kept my documents and the money I had saved. All gone. I was in shock, trying to process what had happened. That's when it hit me. Ralph, the drink, the way I got dizzy out of nowhere. He had drugged and robbed me. I felt a mix of anger, fear, and shame. How could I have been so stupid? I ran to the bathroom and threw up, more from nerves than from the drug's effect. I didn't know what to do. My head was spinning. Should I tell someone? What if they didn't believe me? After all, I was just a bartender, and he was a rich passenger. I decided to look for him first, see if I could resolve this without drawing attention. I spent the whole day searching for Ralph on the ship. I asked other passengers, staff, checked all the bars and restaurants. Nothing. It was as if he had vanished. At the end of the day, exhausted and desperate, I ended up telling my supervisor everything. He was shocked, of course, and called ship security. They asked a ton of questions, searched my cabin again, but found nothing. The worst part was discovering that the name and details Ralph had given for check-in were fake. The following days were hell. Ship security kept questioning me as if I was the guilty one. I had to keep working, serving drinks with a fake smile while feeling like trash inside. Other staff members whispered in corners, looking at me with pity or suspicion. I didn't know which was worse. The worst of all was the feeling of vulnerability. Every time a passenger smiled at me or started a chat, I froze. When the ship finally docked in New York, I thought the nightmare was over. How stupid I was. I had barely set foot on solid ground when I noticed a guy following me. At first, I thought it was all in my head. I was paranoid, right? But then I realized it wasn't my imagination. The guy was really following me. I panicked. Was it Ralph? Or someone working for him? I ran into a store, my heart almost jumping out of my mouth. I stayed inside for ages, shaking, until I gathered the courage to leave. The guy had disappeared, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. That's when I realized this was far from over. In the days that followed in New York, I lived in a constant state of alert. Every time I left the hotel, I felt like someone was watching me. Sometimes I swore I saw the same guy from before following me, but when I looked again, he'd vanish into the crowd. I started getting really paranoid. I couldn't sleep properly, barely ate. I was always looking over my shoulder, expecting to see Ralph or some henchman of his. I even went to the police, but they couldn't do much. Without concrete evidence, it was just the word of a scared bartender against the wind. The worst part was that I couldn't simply go home. I had another cruise scheduled to start in a week, and I needed that job. But the idea of going back to the ship gave me chills. What if Ralph showed up again? What if there were others like him out there, ready to make a fool of me again? I spent the whole week in an internal debate, not knowing what to do. On one hand, I didn't want to give up on my dream because of a jerk. On the other, I was genuinely scared. The night before embarking, I had such a real nightmare that I woke up screaming. I dreamed I was on the ship and Ralph was chasing me through endless corridors. I woke up in a cold sweat with my heart racing. That's when I made my decision. The next morning, I called my boss and quit. He was surprised, tried to convince me to stay, but I was determined. I couldn't do it anymore. The idea of going back to the ship left me in panic. I took what little money I had left and bought a bus ticket to somewhere far away. I didn't even know where I was going. I just wanted distance from all that. During the trip, I kept looking out the window, paranoid, thinking I'd see Ralph or the guy who followed me in New York at every gas station we stopped at. I ended up in a small town in the middle of nowhere. Can't even remember the name now. I got a job as a waitress in a local cafe and rented a small room in the back of a family house. I tried to start over, but it wasn't easy. Every time a new customer entered the cafe, I froze. Every strange noise at night made me jump out of bed. I changed my phone number, created new social media profiles, did everything to hide. But the feeling of being watched, that Ralph could appear at any moment, wouldn't go away. Months passed, and gradually, I tried to return to normal. But normal didn't mean the same thing to me anymore. I still looked twice at every guy who entered the cafe, still locked my room door with 3 turns every night. I made friends with some people in town, but always kept a distance. I couldn't open up anymore, tell about my past. When they asked about my life before coming there, I made up some generic story. I felt bad about lying, but the fear that Ralph might find me somehow was greater. One day, almost a year after the incident, I was walking down the town's main street when I froze. I swore I saw Ralph across the street, staring at me. My heart raced, my legs went weak. I blinked several times, and when I looked again, it wasn't him. Just some guy who didn't even look that much like Ralph. I realized then that, even after all this time, that experience still haunted me. Ralph had disappeared months ago, probably didn't even remember me anymore. But in my head, he was still there, chasing me. At that moment, I understood that my biggest challenge wasn't running from him anymore, but overcoming the fear he had planted in me. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust people again like before, or if I'll stop looking over my shoulder. But I know I need to try, or I'll spend the rest of my life as a prisoner of a nightmare that happened on a cruise ship one night.